I am Dr. Olivia Harrison, a wildlife veterinarian with over 20 years of experience. My job is to care for, protect, and study rare animals, especially those in danger or requiring medical attention. Yet if there is one thing I can never forget, it is my past failure, the loss of a pregnant leopard and her cub, despite my best efforts. That memory haunts me and drives me to ensure I never fail again. 4 months ago, a female black bear was brought to the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where I work. We named her Aurora, a beautiful name befitting her strength and freedom. Aurora had been found in the forest near the Montana border with a minor leg injury and an unusually swollen belly. Tests confirmed she was pregnant, not with just one cub, but several. Olivia, do you think we should release her back into the wild? Carrying so many cubs, the stress here at the center could worsen things for her. Sarah, a colleague of mine, said as we watched Aurora through the glass. Sarah always leaned toward letting animals give birth in their natural habitat, avoiding human interference. No, I don't think so, I replied, my eyes fixed on Aurora. Given her current condition, if she gives birth in the wild, the risks are too high. We need to monitor her closely. Sarah shook her head, her expression filled with concern. I just fear something will happen. If we lose both the mother and the cubs, there'll be no way to save them. I understood Sarah's worry, but I couldn't take the risk of leaving Aurora to fend for herself. After my failure in the previous birth case, I vowed never to let another life slip away under my care. Aurora wasn't easy to handle. Though somewhat accustomed to humans, she often growled when anyone came too close. We had to use glass barriers and remote monitoring equipment to observe her. What worried me most were the initial ultrasound images. The cub's heartbeats were irregular, especially one that was significantly weaker than the others. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. I feel like there's something we're not seeing on the ultrasound, I told my team during our meeting. We need to monitor her more closely. This isn't a typical pregnancy. Olivia, you've been worried about this case since day one, James, another staff member, said. Don't let the pressure of the past make you overthink. We've got all the latest equipment. I know, I sighed, but you and I both know that things don't always go as expected. Aurora seemed to sense everything we were doing. She paced constantly in her enclosure, tirelessly building a nest from the hay and branches we provided. Every time I looked at her through the glass, I felt as though she was trying to tell me something, as if she knew I was just as anxious as she was. Olivia, we can't monitor her 24/7, Sarah said again. At some point, we have to trust that nature will do its part. True, I nodded, my eyes still fixed on Aurora. But sometimes, nature needs a little help. I knew not everyone agreed with my decision to keep Aurora under observation, but I didn't care. To me, the most important thing was the safety of Aurora and her unborn cubs. My past failure had taught me that caution and determination could mean the difference between life and death. That night, as I sat in my office, I reviewed Aurora's ultrasound images again. The cubs were developing, but the faint shadow of something abnormal lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were facing something unprecedented. Yet no matter what lay ahead, I knew I had to be ready, not just for Aurora, but for myself. Aurora gradually adapted to life at the rehabilitation center, but her behavior continued to worry me. Unlike other pregnant bears that typically rest, she was constantly pacing, rarely staying still. On some days, she growled at anyone approaching her enclosure, even through the glass barrier. This forced us to minimize direct interaction, relying instead on remote observation and monitoring. She seems more stressed than usual, Olivia. Sarah commented as we watched Aurora on the monitor. That's not good for her pregnancy. I know, I replied, my mind heavy with concern, but I can't pinpoint what's causing her restlessness. In addition to her pacing, Aurora exhibited erratic eating habits. Some days she barely touched her food. On others, she ate everything we provided. I tried to maintain a balanced diet for her, but her unpredictable behavior only deepened my unease. One day, while reviewing her latest ultrasound images, I noticed something that made my heart sink. The heartbeat of one of Aurora's cubs was significantly weaker than the others. I tried to remain composed in front of the team, but it was clear this was not a good sign. The heartbeat of this cub, it's unstable, I said, pointing at the screen. If this continues, it might not survive. Olivia, is there anything we can do to intervene? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with worry. I shook my head. No, not at this point. We have to let nature take its course. But I want us to monitor her even more closely. If anything changes, we need to act immediately. I began spending more time with the monitoring equipment, frequently reviewing data and ultrasound images. Aurora seemed to grow more fatigued but continued her unusual behaviors. She started gathering hay and leaves into the corner of her enclosure, constructing what appeared to be a nest in preparation for giving birth. She's nesting, James remarked as we observed Aurora through the glass. At least this shows her maternal instincts are intact. It was a small glimmer of hope amidst my growing concern. Aurora's actions suggested she was preparing for the arrival of her cubs, but I couldn't ignore the ominous signs lingering in my mind. I nodded, but the worry still lingered. I hope her instincts will be enough to get her through this. One day, while reviewing data, I received an alert from the monitoring equipment. Aurora's heart rate had spiked, accompanied by intense movements from her belly. I rushed to the observation room. Aurora's not okay, Sarah called out as I entered. She's extremely agitated. I looked through the glass and saw Aurora pacing and whimpering, her entire body tense. She wasn't just under the strain of pregnancy. It was clear she was experiencing severe pain. I quickly checked her vitals. Her heart rate is still stable, but she's under immense stress, I said, trying to stay calm. We need to keep monitoring her. No intervention unless absolutely necessary. That night, after everyone had left, I stayed in the observation room to watch over Aurora. Seeing her lying there, breathing heavily, I couldn't stop my thoughts from drifting to the past. The image of the pregnant leopard I had failed to save resurfaced vividly in my mind. I remembered the helplessness of watching her and her unborn cub slip away. I couldn't let the same thing happen to Aurora. Not again. The next morning, Aurora seemed slightly better, though she was still weak and hadn't eaten. I prepared a specially formulated meal rich in nutrients, hoping it might help. As I stood watching her from a distance, Aurora turned her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes, once wary and aggressive, now held an uncharacteristic gentleness. It felt as though she was trying to tell me she would be okay. Hang in there, my strong girl, I whispered through the glass. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Although Aurora was temporarily stable, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The weak heartbeat of one cub, Aurora's strange behaviors, and my persistent sense of unease gnawed at me. Something was waiting for us ahead. Something I couldn't predict. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't give up. That morning, as I stepped into the observation room, Aurora's low, rumbling growl echoed through the space, signaling the moment we had been waiting for over the past several weeks. The team was immediately assembled, each person moving into their assigned positions to monitor and document the process. Aurora was in labor. Prepare all the equipment, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. No one intervenes unless there are signs of distress. Aurora lay in the nest she had been building for weeks. Her entire body was tense, every labored breath echoing clearly in the observation room. Her sleek black fur glistened with sweat under the soft lighting. I kept a close watch on her vitals displayed on the monitors. Her heart rate was steady, but the contractions were growing stronger. "The first one is coming!" Sarah exclaimed, her eyes glued to the screen. Everyone held their breath as a tiny cub emerged. Its small, wet body quivered as Aurora bent down and gently licked away the membrane covering it. A faint sound broke the silence, the cub's first breath. The room collectively exhaled. "We're good so far," I said, a wave of relief washing over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. Aurora continued to endure the contractions. Less than half an hour later, the second cub was born, followed by the third and then the fourth. With each birth, I could see the exhaustion taking its toll on Aurora's body, but her maternal instincts were remarkable. She didn't pause for a second, wholly focused on cleaning and warming her newborns. 4 cubs so far, James announced, his voice tinged with excitement. All of them look healthy, no visible abnormalities. I nodded, my eyes never leaving Aurora. But we're not done yet. The contractions haven't stopped. When the fifth cub was born, the room erupted with quiet celebration. 5 tiny, healthy cubs nestled close to Aurora. I glanced at the monitors. Everything seemed stable. The team began to relax, with some even exchanging soft smiles and whispers of joy. "This is incredible," Sarah said, smiling at me. 5 cubs. It's nothing short of a miracle." I smiled back at Sarah, but the unease in my chest remained. Aurora seemed to have completed her task, but I couldn't shake the lingering worry. I turned back to the monitor. Aurora's vitals were stabilizing, but I noticed her heart rate was slightly irregular. The contractions, which should have subsided by now, were still continuing. "Something's not right," I murmured. Sarah glanced at me, concern in her eyes. "Aurora isn't done." "Are you sure?" James asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "We already have 5 cubs. Her body can't handle more." I stayed silent, focusing intently on the data. The numbers didn't lie. Aurora's contractions were still as strong as they had been during the birth of the 5th cub. My heart raced. Had we overlooked something? Aurora let out a loud growl, her body shaking violently. She curled into herself, struggling for breath. The cubs seemed to sense their mother's distress and began emitting small, high-pitched cries. Despite her exhaustion, Aurora kept straining, clearly trying to push through whatever was happening. "We need to be ready," I said firmly. "She might be trying to deliver another cub, or there could be a serious complication." James shot me a doubtful look. "Black bears don't have more than 5 cubs, Olivia. That's biologically impossible." "Maybe," I replied, keeping my voice calm but insistent. "But the data says otherwise. We need to prepare." Aurora strained one more time, her growl tearing through the still air. I stared intently through the glass, and the room fell completely silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting for whatever was about to happen. "What's going on?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with alarm. Aurora arched her body in one final push, and then she collapsed, lying completely still. No one dared to speak. I glanced at the monitor, watching her vitals gradually stabilize. The pain seemed to have subsided, but I couldn't be sure. "Looks like it's over," James said, breaking the silence. 5 cubs, all safe and sound." I didn't respond. The data on the screen told a different story. Aurora appeared calmer now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. I stood motionless, my eyes fixed on her, waiting for any sign that might reveal what was really happening. Deep inside, the unease burned steadily. A gut feeling told me we hadn't reached the end of this journey yet. This time, I knew I couldn't afford to let my guard down for even a moment. The observation room was steeped in silence as we watched Aurora and her 5 cubs curled together in their nest. Aurora exhaled heavily, her massive body stretched out across the hay. It should have been a perfect ending, but the nagging sense of unease refused to leave me. The monitor still signaled something unusual. Aurora's contractions weren't subsiding as they should after giving birth. "Olivia," Sarah whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. "Do you see this? These contractions don't look like normal postpartum ones." "I see it," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Aurora isn't done, I'm certain." James sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Olivia, I think you're overreacting. No bear has ever given birth to more than 5 cubs. It's impossible." "Maybe it's never happened before, but you're witnessing it right now," I said firmly. "We need to prepare for anything." Suddenly, Aurora shuddered, her entire body tensing once more. She let out a low whimper, her heavy breathing filling the room. The team immediately stopped what they were doing, all eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. "Exactly what I suspected," I said, the tension in my chest tightening. "She's still in labor." Aurora strained again, her breaths more labored than ever. This contraction was prolonged, as if her body were fighting to push something extraordinary into the world. I gripped the pen in my hand tightly, the air in the room thick with anticipation. "What is that?" Sarah gasped, her eyes locked on the glass. A small form began to emerge from Aurora's body, a 6th cub. But from the moment it appeared, I knew this wasn't an ordinary cub. It was significantly larger than its siblings, its damp body glistening under the dim lights of the observation room. Its fur was a striking silver gray, marked with intricate, unfamiliar patterns that shimmered faintly. "No way," James stammered, his hands trembling. "That's not a black bear. It can't be." Aurora mustered all her remaining strength to deliver the 6th cub. As its body emerged and the light struck its fur, The intricate silver patterns on its coat became even more vivid, like the etchings of an ancient mural. It felt as though the air in the room had been sucked away, leaving only a charged silence. Everything I was witnessing seemed to defy reality. "Olivia," Sarah called out softly, her voice trembling. "It's opening its eyes. Newborn cubs don't open their eyes immediately. This shouldn't be possible." I looked closer, and there it was, the cub's eyes. They were unlike anything I had ever seen in any bear species. Bright amber, glowing with a sharp intelligence and a vitality that felt almost sentient. It wasn't just looking, it was observing, as though it was truly aware of its surroundings. Aurora turned her head, slowly bending down to care for the sixth cub. Despite her exhaustion, she delicately licked its body, cleaning it with the same tenderness she had shown the others. The other cubs had already curled up, sleeping soundly, but not this one. It let out a soft cry, distinct from the usual sounds of newborn cubs. The tone of it resonated through the room, both eerie and captivating. "I've never heard anything like that before," Sarah murmured, her hand scribbling notes furiously. "Olivia, could this be some kind of mutation?" "Maybe," I replied, though deep down, I knew this was more than a simple mutation. We need to document everything, every detail. The sixth cub's movements were unlike those of typical newborns, which were usually feeble and clumsy. It moved its head with an unusual precision, its amber eyes scanning the room as though searching for something. There was a strange energy radiating from it, an undeniable presence that everyone in the room could feel. "Look at its paw pads!" Sarah suddenly exclaimed, nearly shouting. I followed her gaze and saw the markings on the soles of the cub's feet, distinct patterns resembling ancient symbols, etched with a clarity that seemed deliberate. "Olivia, what are we looking at here?" James asked, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. This isn't natural." My mind raced with questions, each more impossible than the last. What was this cub, and what did its arrival mean? Not just for Aurora, but for all of us. I didn't answer. I felt as though I was standing before a mystery far greater than anything I had ever learned in my career as a wildlife veterinarian. After tending to the sixth cub, Aurora slowly shifted her body to shield it, as if to protect her newborn from our curious gazes. "We need to record everything," I finally said, breaking the silence. "No one will believe this without evidence." The team sprang into action, meticulously documenting every detail. I grabbed my notebook, my hand moving as fast as a machine as I jotted down observations. The characteristics of the sixth cub were nothing short of extraordinary. Its large size, the intricate silver patterns on its fur, the glowing amber eyes that opened immediately, and the strange sounds it made. Every detail felt like a piece of a puzzle we didn't yet have the knowledge to solve. "Name it," Sarah said, her eyes still fixed on the cub. I paused for a moment before whispering, "Celestia. It looks like it belongs to the heavens." "Celestia," Sarah repeated, as though testing how the name felt. "Perfect." Aurora lay still, exhausted but vigilant, her eyes sharp as she shielded Celestia with her body. I couldn't look away from them, feeling as though I was witnessing something that defied the boundaries of nature itself. This wasn't just a birth. It was the unveiling of a secret, a marvel beyond comprehension. My heart was filled with both awe and trepidation. Celestia wasn't just another cub. It was the beginning of a story that I knew would change everything. The next morning, when I returned to the observation room, Aurora and her 6 cubs were still curled up in the nest. The 5 ordinary cubs were fast asleep, but Celestia was different. It didn't stay still. Instead, it moved constantly, its amber eyes wide open, watching everything around it with an unusual alertness. I stood silently for a moment, observing it through the glass, my mind replaying everything that had happened the day before. Celestia was unlike any bear I had ever encountered, and I knew our team would have to work tirelessly to understand it. We began by carefully collecting initial data and blood samples. Every step had to be executed delicately to avoid stressing Aurora or the other cubs. Aurora, despite her exhaustion, remained fiercely protective of Celestia. Even the slightest movement from us elicited a warning growl. "We'll take this one step at a time," I told the team. "No forcing anything. I don't want Aurora or Celestia to feel threatened." Sarah and I reviewed the footage from the previous day. Close-up images of Celestia revealed that the markings on its fur weren't merely colorations. The symbols resembled ancient designs, as though they were carved into its shimmering silver coat. We captured every detail, trying to decipher their meaning. "Do you see this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "These markings can't be random. They look like some kind of ancient symbols humans used to carve." "Are you saying it's a sign?" James interjected skeptically. "A bear can't have symbols like that naturally." "I'm not saying it's a sign," Sarah replied, "but we can't deny that this is highly unusual." The blood data from Celestia shocked the entire team. The test results showed that its blood contained properties entirely different from any black bear we had ever studied. Certain protein and enzyme levels didn't match any known species. "This isn't natural," James stammered, staring at the results. "I can't believe this." "But it's right in front of you, James," I replied firmly. "The real question now is what this means." Not only did the blood test results surprise us, but Celestia's behavior continued to defy everything we thought we knew. While the other 5 cubs spent their time nursing and sleeping, Celestia was already exhibiting actions resembling those of an adult bear. It lifted its head, attempted to stand on its tiny legs, and seemed to explore its surroundings. We documented its every move, leaving nothing unrecorded. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to the monitor. "It's not just moving, it's trying to interact with its siblings." Celestia lowered its head and made a soft but distinct sound. One of the other cubs raised its head in response, replying with a faint cry. This wasn't typical behavior for newborns, which usually take weeks before beginning to communicate with each other. "That sound, it's unlike anything I've ever heard," Sarah observed, meticulously jotting down notes. "It's almost like a form of language." Aurora seemed acutely aware of Celestia's uniqueness. Each time Celestia made a sound or moved, Aurora would immediately lower her head to shield it, or gently nudge it back toward her side. This level of attentiveness wasn't shown to the other cubs, only to Celestia. I couldn't help but wonder if Aurora's maternal instincts recognized that Celestia was truly different. "Everything about it is extraordinary," I said, almost to myself. "Not just its appearance, but how it reacts to its environment." The more we studied Celestia, the more I realized this could be a groundbreaking moment in wildlife biology. Yet the pressure was mounting. The world wouldn't easily accept what we were witnessing. Every piece of evidence, from blood samples to behavior, had to be meticulously documented to withstand scrutiny. "Olivia," James spoke after a long silence. "What do you think this is? A mutation? Or something else?" I paused my note-taking, looking through the glass at Celestia. It lay curled up beside Aurora, its glowing amber eyes still open, as though listening to every word we said. "I don't know," I replied slowly. "But one thing I'm sure of, this isn't random, and we need to find out why." As I watched Aurora and Celestia together, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of uncovering something far greater than we could comprehend. Celestia wasn't just an extraordinary cub, it represented something I couldn't yet name, a mystery that demanded answers. The story of Aurora and Celestia couldn't stay hidden for long. Just days after we uncovered the anomalies, word began to leak out. The first images of Celestia quickly spread among scientists, and the response was overwhelming. Calls and emails flooded the rehabilitation center, with everyone demanding answers. Skepticism ran high, and many questioned the validity of what we had documented. "Olivia, we won't be able to keep this under wraps much longer," Sarah said, her voice tense as she glanced out at the center's entrance, where reporters and their cameras had already started to gather. "They'll demand answers." "I know," I sighed, "but before we say anything, I need to ensure that all our data is collected and verified. No one will believe us without clear, irrefutable evidence." We worked tirelessly to compile the first scientific report. Blood samples, images, video footage of Celestia's behavior, everything was meticulously recorded, stored, and backed up. I knew that even the slightest mistake could undermine the significance of what we were witnessing. Meanwhile, Aurora continued caring for Celestia and her other cubs as usual. But with each passing day, Celestia's uniqueness became increasingly apparent. It wasn't just growing faster than its siblings, it was displaying behaviors far beyond its age. Its amber eyes seemed to radiate awareness, as though it comprehended more than we could imagine. The sounds it made, strange, captivating, kept me glued to the monitor, trying to decipher their meaning. "Olivia," Sarah called, breaking my focus as she reviewed the nighttime footage. "You need to see this." I stepped over and looked at the screen. In the infrared lighting, the other cubs were sleeping soundly, but Celestia was different. It was up and moving steadily around the nest with confident steps. What stunned me, though, was the faint glow emanating from the patterns on its silver fur. The light wasn't bright but subtle, pulsing gently in rhythm with its breathing, as though the markings were alive. "This isn't possible," I whispered, feeling a mix of awe and trepidation. "And yet it's happening," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with tension. "Do you think these patterns could mean something? Maybe a signal or some kind of language?" I didn't respond immediately, my eyes locked on the screen. Every instinct told me we were standing on the edge of an extraordinary discovery, something that transcended biology and touched on a deeper mystery. Whatever Celestia represented, it was far beyond anything we had encountered before. I didn't respond. I just stood there, staring at the screen. Celestia seemed to hold within her a secret far greater than anything I had ever imagined. The news outside continued to escalate. Scientists from around the globe began flying to Montana, eager to witness Celestia firsthand. We arranged a private press conference, inviting only the most reputable experts to share our initial data. Their reactions mirrored ours, equal parts astonishment and bewilderment. "You're saying these blood samples don't match any known bear species?" one researcher asked during the conference. "That's correct," I replied. "Celestia exhibits genetic traits that don't align with any species we're familiar with. We're still working to understand more." "Could this be a natural mutation?" another asked, but before I could respond, Sarah interjected. "A natural mutation could explain some aspects," she said confidently, "but nothing in nature explains the markings on her fur." Sarah was right, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the thought that Celestia wasn't merely a natural anomaly. She represented something far greater, perhaps the result of an unprecedented mutation, perhaps a mystery humanity had yet to uncover, or perhaps something that defied all our understanding. That night, as I stood in the observation room, watching Celestia through the glass, an unfamiliar emotion settled over me. It wasn't fear, nor was it entirely excitement. It was the feeling of standing before something that could fundamentally change how we perceive nature. Celestia lay beside Aurora, her glowing amber eyes cutting through the darkness. She looked directly at me through the glass, as though she wanted to communicate something. I whispered softly, almost without realizing it. "Where did you come from, Celestia? And why are you here?" Celestia just stared at me, her gaze holding answers she wouldn't reveal. I knew this story wasn't over. In truth, it was only just beginning, and I knew I would dedicate my life to unraveling the secrets Celestia carried.